So it's that time of year, Halloween. Halloween candies are all across the shelves, and I don't know about you, I used to have one Halloween candy that I really loved, and it was very specific. It was candy corn. And not just candy corn, but this autumn mix of candy corn that has little pumpkins and little chocolates and little other things in it. I say I used to have it because when I was younger than I am now, but old enough to know better, I decided that I was going to have a bag of that candy corn. And it was right before dinner, and I was hungry and hadn't really thought about how much of it I was eating until I had eaten too much of it. And then we had dinner that night, and for dinner we had a baked chicken. And I don't know if it was a combination of the candy corn or the fact that the baked chicken might not have been baked all the way through. But later in the evening, I was painfully reminded of how much of the candy corn I had actually eaten. Ever since then, I don't eat candy corn anymore. It's no longer my favorite. I don't enjoy it. I don't appreciate it. And it becomes a joke in our house now that Lisa goes out and buys a bag of candy corn and brings it home and says, "Hey, do you want to eat this?" No, I'm good. Shove that in the pantry in the back where no one sees it until next year. And the thing about candy corn is it's still good next year, so you can just leave it there in the back for the next. I bring that up, an interesting point, as I was thinking about this passage this morning in particular. This passage in the New Testament that we encounter, it's a difficult passage. It's a challenging passage that a lot of times we don't really like to preach about or talk about. There are things about this passage that become a little bit hard, and so we try to soften some of those blows. In this passage, we have Jesus, and he's standing there, and he's teaching to a group of people, and then they finally leave, and this one man who's been so enamored with Jesus' teaching, who is so just awestruck by what Jesus has been saying and how he is sharing these messages, and he comes to Jesus, and he wants to know more about this thing that Jesus is talking about. He wants to know more about the kingdom of God. You see, he's been amazed by the teachings of Jesus, and he says to Jesus, what do I need to do to make sure that I inherit the kingdom of God? And Jesus turns to him and he says, okay, well, what are the commandments? Honor your father and mother, and care for those that you need to. Do all these list of things that you're supposed to. Do not commit adultery, do not steal. And so he comes to the end of that list, and the man turns to Jesus and he says, I have kept all of these things since my youth. A little bit proud of himself probably at that moment. And then Jesus stops him and he turns to him and he says, oh, there's one more thing. He says, go and sell all of your possessions. Give them to the poor, and then come and follow me. And it says that the man stops for a minute, and then he just turns and he walks away sad, for he had many possessions that he loved. And that's the last that we hear about the rich man and Jesus. And it's an interesting passage, and it's a difficult thing in large part, even for the time in which it was spoken, because it says the disciples were very distraught and perplexed at what Jesus had just told them. And Jesus turns to the disciples and he says to them, you see, it's hard for anybody to enter into the kingdom of heaven. So hard, in fact, that he uses this expression. He says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for somebody who has these possessions to enter and understand the kingdom of God. And that's part of the passage that ends up being really complicated. What is it that God is really trying to say through that? What is it that Christ is saying in the midst of this statement? And over the years, I got into a conversation with a colleague of mine this week who pastors up at a church in New Jersey, and we were talking about this because it's the lectionary passage, and he had asked me if I was going to be preaching on it, and so I offered him kind of a bit of my take on understanding of the passage, and he offered his, and there's differences that we all take a look at, and sometimes those differences make it a little easier to swallow this, and sometimes those differences make it a little bit harder. You see, the eye of the needle has been a great point of contention whenever we interpret this passage. What does it mean for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle? Just as we start to think about it in our own minds, it really seems completely impossible, right? How can something as large as a camel get through something as small as an eye of a needle? And different biblical scholars have taken different approaches at how this actually becomes a thing. Some geographic biblical scholars look back and archaeologically look back at the place in which Jesus was living and teaching around Jerusalem and Bethlehem at the time. And in Jerusalem, it was said to be this gate that you had to pass through. As you walk into the city gate in the older days, you would have this kind of massive wall built all the way around the city, and then there was a gate that got you inside into the marketplace and the villages where the people were actually living. And it's said that at one point this passageway that they had to get through was called the Eye of the Needle. And some people will dispute whether or not that's really an actuality of what it was, but a lot of archaeologists will defend that statement and say that, yeah, this is kind of what it is. And to get your animals that you would take, these large camels full of supplies, the way that we use semi-trucks or trains nowadays, and to move them from city to city, once they got into the city, to get through this corridor, the camels had to have all of the goods that were on them taken off of their back. So all of the bags and all of the things that they had to strip them all down. And then it was still so small of a space that many of the camels had to get down on their knees and essentially crawl their way through this corridor inside the marketplace. And once they get inside the marketplace, they would be able to put all their goods back on them or sell them and then get them back out and leave again. But it was a complicated process that would involve a kind of a traffic jam, probably similar to what we see at 1604 in Bandera here on a consistent basis. It was this traffic jam of difficulty of trying to get something passed through there. And there's something beautiful about that, I think. There's something magnificently beautiful about this sense that when we come before the throne of God, when we come to understand the kingdom of God and the way we are to participate in it, sometimes that's what it requires. Sometimes it requires us taking off our backpacks, our suitcases, all the other things that are loading us and weighing us down. And I think there's something beautiful in the nature of saying that the camel then gets down on its knees and has to crawl. There's something magnificent in this entire imagery for me that is beautiful because it requires and reminds us that there are a lot of things that we carry around every day. Some of those are tangible goods. Some of those things may be money. Some of those things might not be. Some of those things might just be our own things that we deal with. Anger, frustration, resentment, bitterness. Things that bother us about what that person did to us 3 or 4 weeks ago, or maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we're still holding on to it. And how much does that weigh us down? And how hard is it for us to keep holding on to those things and still try and pass through to the kingdom of God? In one part, I think that's really what Christ is saying in this. I think that the archaeologists and those who define it in this way do have something there. There's a beautiful metaphor that's presented and created that reminds us that, in fact, we have to remove those things, that we have to bring ourselves into a meditative state, a welcoming state, a place where we say and recognize that we are not God, but God alone is God, and we have to listen to what that is. So I shared that with my colleague, and he said, yeah, he said, that's good. He said, I don't really buy into the whole eye of the camel, the needle thing, as you see it archaeologically. He said, I see it as a different approach. And so he started to share with me, and another approach that some biblical scholars take, linguistic scholars particularly, they say that sometimes we've misinterpreted or mistranslated some of these words. And the word for camel is actually really, really close to the word for rope in Greek. And so another interpretation of this passage basically is saying, so it is so difficult to enter the kingdom of heaven. In fact, it is so difficult that you can't even take a rope through an eye needle before getting into the kingdom of heaven. And we have some ladies here who participate in our quilting group, and we'll have a couple prayer quilt dedications. But I could just imagine if you had to try and knit a quilt using rope, getting it through the eye of a needle. And I can see some of you with this exhausted look on your face as I say that. It is seemingly an impossibility. A complete impossibility to use something so thick and so large and so bulky and to try and thread it so finely through something like the eye of a needle. And my friend said to me, he said, I think that's really what the passage is essentially about, that it's impossible. And in fact, at the end of this passage, it says the disciples are there and they're talking to Jesus and they say, then how can any mortal inherit the kingdom of God? And Jesus says, well, for mortals it's impossible, but nothing is impossible for God. And I think there's something magnificently beautiful there, isn't it? Something that tells us that yes, while even it seems that it is impossible for us to unload those things, while it is impossible for us to carry the things that we are carrying and holding on to and then to remove those things from ourselves, that sense of impossibility is actually possible for God. I remember years ago, my first year in seminary, it was a group of us, myself and another friend of mine, and both of our spouses had said that we were going to give something up for Lent. And a friend of mine came and he said, you know what, I'm thinking about giving up meat, just altogether. I'm just going to go completely vegetarian for Lent. And I said, that sounds crazy. Good luck with that. And I said to myself, I can't do that. That's impossible. And a couple days later, as I sat and I thought about it, I began to think, well, maybe if I think that it's impossible, then it's something that I should actually try. Because a lot of times in our lives, I think there are things that we know that we are called to get rid of, things that we are called to shed off, things that we are called to remove from our lives. And instinctively, our initial response is, that's impossible. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. That's not going to happen. And perhaps it's those exact things that God is calling us to let go of. In the story of the rich young ruler, we seem to get caught up a lot of times on the fact that it is his wealth. I mean, Jesus overtly, explicitly says about this man, well, sell all of your possessions, give everything that you have to the poor, and go. But the interesting thing here for me as I read it, in this middle ground between these two perspectives, is essentially what Jesus is saying to the rich young man is what he's saying to him, in part because he is the rich young ruler. You see, for him, that has been the pinnacle form of expression of what is important in his life. For him, it has been money. And that may not be the case for each and every one of us. Each one of us holds on to something individual and different. But we hold on to something all the same. Whatever it is, we hold on to this thing. And it may be tangible like money. It may be something tangible like a car or a house or something that we've really appreciated for so long. And maybe it's something intangible. Maybe it is resentment and anger and bitterness. Maybe it's something, and whatever that is for you, if God is calling you and saying to you this week, get rid of that. Remove that thing from your life. Not because of some overt, abstract command that's supposed to apply to you, but because it's better for your life when you get rid of that thing and move on to what God has for you. That is the beautiful statement that I think this passage is really providing for us. That there is something in each and every one of our lives that can weigh us down. And we can feel like a camel wandering through the desert with all these packs of things that we're holding on to. Things from our past, things that we haven't let go of, things that we have seen as important that maybe aren't really even that important. And I think what this passage is continually reminding us is that Christ comes along and says, if you want to enter the kingdom of God, if you want to live in a place where you feel freedom from all of those things weighing you down, then let those things go. Be like the camel who has to get on their knees every once in a while and recognize what those things are. See the beauty of what God has for you, because it is only in letting go of those things that we begin to really understand what it is that God wants from us. Only when we are willing to take off the blinders which show us that, well, that's an impossibility, I couldn't possibly do that, that we start to see that perhaps the things that are making it impossible are the things that we should have let go of years ago. I don't know what that is for you, but my prayer for you this week is that you would receive the clarity to see those things. Those things which consume you and weigh you down, the things which bear you down and make you feel as if the world and even getting through it can seem impossible. Because within the kingdom of God, I truly and genuinely believe that there is forgiveness and freedom and grace and mercy and love. And in finally setting down those sacks of things that we've been carrying and holding on to for so long, we are called into a newness of life. We are called into seeing the beauty of something even greater, of seeing the kingdom of God made manifest all around us. As we leave from these doors this week and go out into the world, may we not only remove those bags from ourselves, but find those along the journey who are also struggling. May we remind them that the beauty of God's love doesn't worry about how much you have or what you look like or what you've done, but that the manifestation of the kingdom of God is beautifully created by letting go, by allowing God to reign supremely in all of our lives. To him be the honor, glory, dominion, and power now and forever. Amen.